Have you ever wondered, is what you see really the truth? Or do you only see what you want to see? Have you ever thought, does our five senses work together? And what happens if one of them is lost? Or is there actually more than five senses? Scientists and psychologists have tried to understand how our brain utilizes our visual, auditory, gustatory, olfactory, and tactile senses. So let's dive in and take a deeper look at the fundamental blocks that helped us shape our reality. Hi, I'm Telia.
And I'm Joshua.
And welcome to our podcast, The Uncommon Senses, where we reflect on the nature of knowledge and how we know what we claim to know.
So, hello everyone. So once again, welcome to our podcast. In the following few episodes, we'll focus on sense perception as a way of knowing. We'll first discuss some of the five senses, then dive into how our senses affect our perception of the world. These two aspects will be more related to the human sciences, especially psychology. And lastly, we'll discuss the world that we perceive with our senses and touch upon more about philosophical ideas such as the theories of reality. And for this episode, we'll begin with the five senses. And the following content is what we've learned in school, and we learned it mainly from the BBC Horizon documentary, Is Seeing Believing. We also included our additional research for interesting things that related to this topic. And we hope that after today's episode, you'll see just how unreliable our seemingly reliable five senses are.
Okay, so perhaps let's just dive into the first one, which is the visual sense. And we will illustrate this using like some optical illusions. So, from like the research that we gathered about like visual senses, around more than 50% of our cortex, which is the surface of the brain, is devoted to process visual information. So this kind of just indicates that arguably visual sense is the most important sense that we rely on, since a huge part of our brain is kind of like devoted to this process of processing visual information. However, just how reliable is our visual sense? And we'll present to you guys like a optical illusion. This is a podcast, so we can't really show it to you guys. But we'll give you can definitely search this up if this interests you. The one we found is the checker shadow illusion. So what it was is actually like there on that illusion thing, there is a cylinder on the checkerboard, and then we were asked to compare the shade of two different squares. And one is a darker square on the checkerboard, and the other one is a seemingly lighter square, which basically contains the shadow of the cylinder, but it's like a kind of like a white, lighter colored square if you see this in the context of a checkerboard. So usually our mind would kind of just trick us and think that, okay, the lighter one, the one that is like a white square but has that shadow of the cylinder, is supposedly the lighter square compared with the darker checkerboard square. But then if we take these two squares out of the context, like out of the fact that, okay, this is a shadow and that is like a black checker square, and then we kind of compare that and realize that these two squares actually have the same darkness, so they have the same color. And the reason why our brains kind of trick us to think one is lighter than the other is because like our brain is really good at taking shortcuts to process the world around us, or else we're going to be so overwhelmed by the outside stimuli that's just constantly like bombarding with us basically. So for this illusion, we perceive that there's a light source casting a shadow, so which makes the lighter, checkerboard square darker. But we believe that this is not as dark as the actual like black checkerboard square. And so that's kind of like how this illusion is formed. Like even though we think that these two squares have a different color, but then after we take it out of the context, we realize that they actually have the same. And I think the more bizarre thing is, like, even though like we kind of just showed to you and proved that, okay, these two squares are the same, and like we know that we're being tricked to think one square is lighter than the other. However, the illusion usually overcomes for our sense perception. So even when I show you that they actually have the same darkness, and when we put the two squares back in context again of that checkerboard once again, it's like I didn't even tell you anything. Like your brain will still think that one is darker and one is lighter, even though you already know that they're the same color. So it's kind of like how our interpretation of the whole context of shadows, of light, and this interpretation will succumb to this optical illusion. So I think what this kind of tells us is that when we are looking at our five senses, or the visual sense, which is arguably the most important sense, versus our brain, how our brain processes these information, we'll realize that the brain is actually more powerful, that this interpretation and this kind of expectation, and we believe that there's a lighter square and that is only a shadow, and this prediction or like anticipation of the situation based on this external context of the checkerboard and the cylinder will overcome our eyes, which we see that these two are the same color. I think what this leads to is that we usually see what we expect based on the context. So our visual sense is probably not as reliable as we think, because our brain usually just tricks us to see what we expect. Also, like, I think an additional thing is that we can actually see this kind of expectation, anticipation situation apply to many other real life situations as well, like how we're being influenced by external context or the environment that we're in. So in my university, I enrolled in an organizational behavior course, and we have a video on like decision making. So basically, Joshua, this is like quite an interesting question. So in that video, basically it presented us like a New York Times advertisement, and you have three options for its subscription. And the first one is you can subscribe to the web only version for $59 per year, and then you have a second option, which is print only version for $125 per year. And then you also get a print and web version for $125 per year, which is the same price as the print version only, but you just get an additional web version for $125. So yeah, basically, if this is being presented to you, if you're going to choose which subscription you want, which one will you pick?
I think I'll go with the print and web version, because it seems like a better deal. Not only you're like getting both options, but with a cheaper price overall, like as compared to the combined price of the web only version and also the print only version.
Yeah, exactly. Like this print only version has the same price as the print and web version, so it just makes me feel like, yeah, I possibly have, it's a great deal. I got the same for the same price with an additional thing. And yeah, actually, so the researcher asked like several university students like what would they pick, and like, yeah, majority of them did pick the option that you chose, the print and web version. And I mean, no one picked the print version because like it's the same price. So, however, the research found that if we take out that useless option, so if we only give you two options to compare, one is the web only version and the other one is web plus print version, surprisingly the majority chose the web version only. So they didn't even consider the print and web version for $125. They just subscribed to the web only version for $59. So this is kind of interesting. So because I'm pretty sure like people don't really need the printed version right now in the 21st century anymore. So when we take out that useless option that's just seemingly so stupid, like, who's gonna buy the print version only for the same price as a printed web version? When you presented that option, people would choose the print and web version. But if you remove that useless one, then people will choose the web only version instead. And this is just kind of like the idea that when we present you with a worse option, so we are more likely to pick the better version of that particular option. However, if we take that worse option out, then the results may differ drastically. So just like what we were being like illustrated just now.
Yeah, do you think there's actually like a purpose of why our brain works that way? Because, some people actually say that illusions actually serve a purpose in, getting information across quicker, or some other reasons for, survival during our
Hmm.
pre-civilization time. So do you think like this kind of like comparative kind of thinking actually serves a purpose for our brains on how it operates?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's a really good question. And I think our brain is constantly like comparing different options and different things because like yeah, we want the best for ourselves out of like all the options we get to choose. This is just like a I guess just like a intuition thing like we just all want the best version. We just all want the best thing and best deal. Um, so yeah, I do feel like it just on an evolutionary perspective, like that is also kind of applicable. Like we want to have the better choice, so then we ensure our own survival or like survival of the next generations and stuff. And that's actually very interesting because like it's something very primitive because like um, they also did a very similar case for physical attractiveness. So like I would say physical attractiveness is kind of important for like just a fundamental like animal survival perspective, like yeah, and so it's the same. Like if you're presented with three people and like one is there's one person and another person and an uglier version of one of the persons, then you are most likely to pick the the one that you can like compare between the uglier and the prettier version. So yeah, I just feel like it's very
Oh, so
interesting, like
that's why
how
people are inviting me to their parties. So
I never
comparative
got
studies,
invited.
guys.
I got no friends, and I don't go to parties anyway.
Quarantine,
But
guys. It's quarantine's fault, not your fault.
yeah, yes, exactly. But yeah, I just think that's really interesting, like how we think that we're making independent decisions. We think we're being smart with choosing like the best option of them all. But if we take that worst option out, then our decisions might really be very different from the ones that we make when there is a comparison being presented to us. And so the above example of the checkerboard illusion as well as the subscription case, they all kind of illustrate just how likely we are to be affected by the external context, by other options, by having this comparison or like seeing things in its own situation, and that kind of changes how we perceive the world and how we make decisions. And we will continue to talk about this perception in the next few episodes because there's a lot of things to talk about in sense of perception, and I think this is definitely a very important area. And I think a possible theory of knowledge TOK question can be, how can our biases and prejudices affect how we see the world around us? Because in just now that case, we have this bias of seeing which subscription is better. We have this worse subscription option, and then we also have like different biases of seeing the two checkerboard shades in its context of we assume there's a light shadow, there is a cylinder, and with all of these contexts and these like biases that we originally have, it definitely affects our perception of the world. And once again, yeah, we'll talk more about this in the future episodes. So I guess now we can move on to the next one, the next sense perception discussion. And the one we prepared is visual and sound, and we used this to illustrate. We used a auditory illusion case called the McGurk effect to kind of illustrate this comparison between our visual sense as well as our auditory sense. So basically, the McGurk effect, this auditory illusion, is basically we're being presented with the same audio of a person saying ba. However, in the video clip, we seem to hear both ba and fa sound depending on the different shape of the mouth as we lip read the person from the video clip. So basically, if it's just like this sound, then we assume that we will hear ba. But then if it's like in the video, then we will think that we heard fa sound, even though we are presented with the same audio clip. So the person is saying ba throughout the whole video, but then it's just the shape of his mouth that has changed. And then just because of that, we will hear different sounds. We will hear differently in our brain, basically. So that auditory illusion basically presents a clash between what we see and what we hear. And I've tried this, and it's you just close your eyes, you will hear the ba sound. But if you open your eyes and lip read, you will hear differently. So this just kind of illustrates that sometimes what I hear may not always be the truth. And what I see, what I lip read, will usually determine what I hear. So this kind of illustrates how our visual sense is more dominant than our auditory sense, because like our visual sense will take over our what we hear. And basically that example just illustrates how visual sense can clash with auditory sense, and how these two senses, like when they like somewhat work together, when we kind of lip read while listening, actually more uncertainty is being presented. So however, I do have a counter example to this where the visual sense and auditory sense work together. So this is like a very personal example, and Joshua, you also wear glasses, so like I'm sure you can relate to this, like you might be able to relate to this. So there are times where I like take my glasses off, and then like I just feel like I don't hear as well as before. Like I will be like, if I take my glasses off, I sometimes will be like, wait, I don't know what you're talking about. Wait, let me put on my glasses, and like I can hear you better. Like I don't know why. Sometimes that weirdly happens. And so I was looking through like if there's any research paper that kind of proves this, and I don't think there's a lot of studies right now. But then there is a UC Riverside professor, and basically their research is basically about how we lip read each other a lot subconsciously. So one of their research is called Lip Read Me Now, Hear Me Better Later. And it's just basically a research that kind of suggested that we become familiar with a person's speaking style from their lip reading. And that knowledge will be then transformed from lip reading to listening to their speeches. And we will link that research in the description so you can check it out. And so basically I think that is also like kind of interesting. Like Joshua, do you have that kind of experience where you just can't hear as well when you're not wearing your glasses?
To be honest, I'm not. I think so, because like I think I'm not even sure anymore, actually, because I think I just rely on my glasses so much now, like because of seeing things and listening to people talk. I can't really like remember or like think of a time where I hear people talk without having my glasses on, because it has become such a like quintessential part of my life. And yeah, and I just I guess like other than that, it also shows not only do the senses work together a lot and bring a overall experience and to people and bring information to our brain. I think sometimes if you rely on some external tools or like some things that you use every day so much so so much so it can even become a part of you, and also plays a part in delivering information to your brain. So yeah, I'll say that definitely it's I think it I think what the professor and what your phrase is definitely makes sense, because like I think our sense definitely work together and bring up some information to our brain. And as we've said before, I think this is also very evolutionary, because like I think when senses work together, they tend to make us more sensitive to our surroundings, and back to our more primal pre-civilization eras, that could be a difference between life and death.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly true. And I'm like just now you brought out how like our senses can like kind of work together and how we rely on these senses working together. But like I think a very interesting question is like how do our senses work together or work independently? And when can it be helpful or create more uncertainty? Because just now from like that McGurk effect auditory illusion, where you kind of just realize that it will possibly bring you more uncertainty because, whatever lip shape that this person has pronounced, you hear a different sound even though you're given the same audio all the time. So then you become less uncertain with the information that you acquire. And I do see like there are times where our sense will work together, but I do think that there's certain sense that are more independent. Like our visual sense, I think it's quite independent because compared with our gustatory sense and like how we smell and what we taste, like they work together more often than our visual sense working with other senses. So yeah, I think that's kind of interesting to think about.
I also think it's very important for like senses to work together because I think when they kind of bring clashing information, I think it will actually kind of create some sort of cognitive dissonance. Because, for example, an example I can think of is when, seemingly very appealing food tastes bad or like seemingly unappealing food tastes really nice. You don't really know how to make of the experience. You're like, do I like the food or not? My eyes are telling me that, oh, perhaps it's disgusting, but what I'm tasting is absolutely marvelous. So, I think it also brings a lot. I think when senses clash or when they don't tend to not work together, it does bring like a very confusing experience to the person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you mentioned about like the food one, we'll definitely talk more about that in the next part. So maybe let's just move on to that. So just now we talked about visuals with optical illusions, and we also talked about, our visual and sound with a McGurk effect, as well as this, glasses analogy thing. And now we're going to move on to the third part, which is how our visual, sound, tactile, and taste, all of these senses, and smell basically, all of these senses kind of like get mingled up together. And we'll present you something called synesthesia. So yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it, synesthesia. Basically, you might have heard this condition because I think there's quite a lot of like famous musical artists that has this condition. So it's basically a neurological condition where when one sense is activated, another sense is involuntarily activated as well. For example, when you hear something, you might also see a color as well. So that's called chromesthesia. And
chromesthesia. It's hard to read.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how it's pronounced.
Yeah, there's like a whole list of it as I was doing research. Like there's one where you see letters and you see colors, and you see letters, you see sound, and there's like you see numbers and you perceive a lot of different things. Like there's a whole list of different synesthesia types. And basically, it is known that this condition is able to enhance our cognitive abilities, such as creativity and memory. And actually, when we were searching, like, and also like the, the careers being associated with creativity, I think you ultimately think about like math, and you don't think about math, but you definitely think about like.
I don't think about math at all.
Yeah, like creativity with math, like it's hard to imagine, but automatically you possibly think about people are dealing with the creative arts, music, visual arts, or all of these things that we associate with creativity. And many 21st century musical artists have synesthesia, like Lorde, Billie Eilish, and I think Vincent van Gogh as well, right?
Yeah, like many art historians believe that he has chromesthesia, as you've mentioned just now, which is the association between sounds and colors. And historians actually believe that this allowed him to create many of his really iconic styles and artworks, such as the vibrant swirls you see in his masterpiece Starry Starry Night.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and some people, some people say that he has chromesthesia, but others say that it's actually, it's the some of the drugs he take, or perhaps he's taking,
Jeez.
psychedelics. Yeah, and I don't know. Do you think you would like to have a condition like that, like chromesthesia, or like a any kind of synesthesia? Do you think that you actually find that helpful in your day to day life, or even like in your work?
Oh gosh. Right now, I actually feel like that would be kind of helpful. Oh yeah, I do like math, but then you possibly don't like, associate like math with like
Mm.
creativity, like or like, when you see what synesthesia is, that you don't associate with math. However, however, they are like many people with synesthesia that can work out math problems extremely quickly. And one person is called Daniel Tammet, and this guy can remember pi to the 22,000th digit. And he can multiply numbers instantly. And the reason because is that he sees these two colors merge together. So then he sees different numbers with different colors. And when they multiply together, he sees these two numbers colors merge together. And this will kind of like tell him what the answer is. And that's like
God.
so cool. Okay. That is extremely helpful as well
Mm.
with like, math quizzes. And like I think very interestingly, the where I first know about synesthesia, like this, it sounds like a superpower thing. Like the place where I actually saw about this is a book that I was reading called A Mango Shaped Space. I
Uh,
think you also read it, Joshua.
yeah,
Like
I
it
think
was
that
like
was
a,
like part of our high school, I don't know, reading scheme.
yeah, well, I mean, it was part of like our reading scheme things in our school, and like basically, this little girl and this main protagonist has graphene color synesthesia. So what it is basically when she sees colors associated with words and letters, and also I think with numbers as well. That's what I remembered. And just now you mentioned about Vincent van Gogh, and people think like he's on drugs while painting it, and
Yeah.
actually. This girl, this main protagonist from A Mangled Shaped Space,
Mm.
went to like acupuncture or something, and then
Mm.
suddenly she got real high, and then she was basically she was like seeing all these colors, like people's like energy, and I don't know, like
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
some people believe that actually like consuming psychedelics or like having certain drugs actually unlocks new senses, and they argue that because senses are essentially just experiences, and since having hallucinogens will allow you to have like a
Uh-huh.
technically like out of the world, out of body experience, so they argue that that is essentially a new sense. So do you
Oh
agree with
God.
that? Do you think, consuming drugs actually can unleash your, central potential or something like that?
Okay, let me just put a disclaimer. Kids, don't do drugs. Don't do it.
Yes, that's true though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure you can. I mean, I don't know. Like, you really have to, you evaluate your health condition. Like, you can't just be like, I want to experience this brand new sense, and then you went to do drugs. Like, that's just that doesn't make any sense at
Yeah.
all. But I mean, you do see like people who did drugs and like kind of describe that experience,
Mm.
and I think there is a point where it can really influence like your daily life, and it's kind of detrimental to not just your mental health but your physical health. And I think
Mm.
there's like that line you have to cross. But I think yeah, there are definitely plenty of studies done on
Mm.
like what drugs does to your brain, and like how your brain thinks. And I think it's important for people to like understand that, and important to people to recognize that doing drugs is, we definitely do not condone that. Like, it's
Yeah.
don't do that. So
The bottom
yeah,
line
I
is
mean,
like it
hmm
as you said, drugs are detrimental to our health, and our senses shouldn't be
yeah,
able to do that. It should benefit us, not harm us. So yeah, I
yeah,
agree with you. Bottom line is don't do drugs.
yeah, basically. And I mean, I guess I the reason why we have this opinion is I think one of the main reasons is like we're living in an Asian society where doing drugs isn't widely accepted, and it's, yeah, I mean, just, I don't know, perhaps people others outside of the world has like different opinions to this whole drug thing, but this is just, our ideology, our worldview, like our upbringing and what we know. So
I think in Nepal they have this thing called mad honey, where like essentially it's honey that actually can cause you to hallucinate, and eating too much of it actually will be toxic. And to them, they say it's actually like a very spiritual experience. It's part of their culture. Yeah, so I definitely agree with you. Culture plays a big part. So I don't think like in Asian society they really condone the use of drugs, but perhaps in other native cultures, using certain types of drugs is part of their lifestyle, and we should also respect that.
Yeah, I do think like we know like our values, we know like what we believe is right or wrong, but then we shouldn't like use our set to like judge other cultures. So yeah, I guess because I don't really know too much about that culture, or like I don't want to like judge too much on it. But yeah, I think this is kind of interesting how we moved on to like drug use in like a certain sense. But going back to the initial question, like you asked, like, do I want to have like synesthesia? Like, actually, I believe a lot of us wants to experience this cool thing, but then I think actually we are more synesthesiastic than we think. I don't know how is that the word, but I think because synesthesia is kind of like where different senses kind of just involuntarily got like somewhat triggered, and then you experience different sense when you are using one. But I think in a lot of cases we also have that as well. And one of the examples that just immediately popped up in my head when I was thinking about it is from Gordon Ramsay's Hell Kitchen. So in his show, he has this blindfolded taste test to illustrate the gustatory and visual or even auditory connection. So then, like, basically he got these chefs, and then they're basically being blindfolded and they have headphones on, and then they have to taste something to see whether they can taste what that food is. And the result is when someone got blindfolded and like cannot hear anything, basically they can't even taste very simple food. Like I remember one person didn't even recognize chicken meat or something like that. I don't know, but these are like chefs, and there's like culinary chefs, but like because it's named Hell's Kitchen, so naturally they are not top chefs. But
I think you're being too nice.
I mean, the fact that they can't taste very simple food, like they can't taste chicken meat, they can't taste, I think, potato or something. Like, it's just things that we eat every day, but then they can't taste it without the help of visual, like looking at what they're eating, or even like hearing it, and somehow they just can't. So it's kind of just illustrating like just how much we rely on like our other senses as well. And I think there's an experiment which is like the crunchiness of chips. So this kind of illustrate how our gustatory sense is related to our auditory sense. So basically people have like headphones in and they're hearing the crunchiness of the chips, and the higher pitched sound that they heard, these people that were doing the experiment will think that these chips will taste fresher and taste better, basically, just because of the fact that they taste differently, that they have a higher pitched crunching sound. And another example is basically the color of the plates and our appetite. So similar to what Joshua you just previously mentioned, like you're looking at the food and you think it's like, this is so disgusting, but then it tastes pretty nice. So I think it's kind of like a similar case with this one. So the color of plates and the appetite basically suggest that white plates will kind of trick people to think that the food tastes better. And people will eat less if there is a high contrast between the color of the plate and food. So I think a personal experience is kind of like, I like to serve, when I like make soup at home, I like to use a white bowl to have my soup, because my home also has these glass bowls that's like transparent, and I don't like those because it's kind of like I'd really like tomato soups, any soup that is kind of like has tomato flavor or like red, and then the white bowls will really make the red pop. It will make the red look so bright and like it looks so good, but then the glass bowls just like it's just red. So yeah, so a lot of people even suggest that, this color thing actually opens a brand new door for dietary habits. So if you want to eat, a little bit more, then you have something that will make you think that it looks appetizing, have a lighter color plate. And if you want to eat a little bit less because of your diets, then you might want to, change it to a darker color. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting.
People say that red is a hungry color. You see, like big brands like fast food chains, for example, like McDonald's or KFC, they use a lot of red in their logo. And some people actually say that makes people more hungry and psychologically makes you want to eat food from their brand. So I think it's very interesting how, like, evolutionarily, we are kind of more drawn to certain types of colors. Perhaps maybe in the wild, red may signify like a source of food. I don't know, I'm not sure. And maybe because like red is a contrast a lot with like the color green, so maybe like it allows us to better spot food amidst like the vast range of greenery in the wild. I'm not sure, but like I think it's definitely very interesting how like colors and visuals plays a large part of how drawn we are to certain foods. And so I think, if you're a chef or if you're preparing a meal for someone, you should really definitely consider like how the food looks and how does that play into the appetite of your guests.
Yeah, actually that's very interesting, because I remember like before, tomatoes, people thought they were poisonous, because this also applies to like in the wild, right? Like a lot of very vibrant color animals, like insects, are kind of like toxic, or like that thing we always know, like if it's mushroom and it's bright, then it's probably toxic and stuff like that. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like people thought tomatoes are inedible before because it's so bright, but then I think it's just kind of like this thing with food, like this plating thing. Like if you're plating it in a very nice color and you have things that pop out, and it just makes it look very appetizing, I think. And yeah, I guess now we just finished talking about synesthesia and the fact that us, normal people, are also somewhat synesthesiastic.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. And in the next episode, we're going to talk more about like, other than, new senses being born out of synesthesia, is there like other senses that are completely detached or different from the five senses that we're so familiar with? So yeah, in the next episode, we're gonna explore more on that. And thank you for listening to our podcast, and please keep an eye out for new episodes, and we'll see you next time on The Uncommon Senses.
Thank you.
Thank you.